Claire Hoyt vanished in the summer of 1995 after sneaking away to follow a band across state lines. Her family searched for years, but the trail went cold. No sightings, no calls, no body. 29 years later, her brother Malcolm, now a photojournalist himself, walked into a small museum exhibit and saw a photograph that stopped him cold. It wasn't her face that unsettled him. It was the unmistakable sense that she'd been behind the lens. The truth wouldn't come from police files or missing posters. It would come from the photographs themselves, and from what they captured just before she disappeared. Hit subscribe for more strange disappearances, haunted cold cases, and reality-bending investigations. Because every case starts with what's missing, and ends with what was never supposed to be found. In the summer of 1995, Claire Hoyt vanished between a gas station on the Utah border and a motel that no longer exists. She was 17, blonde, sharp-witted, camera always in hand, the type of girl who journaled in margins, made mixtapes for strangers, and shot black and white photos of broken-down diners like they were holy relics. She had left a note for her mother, scrawled in loopy pen, "Don't worry, just following the music for a while, back before school. Love, C." That was the last anyone ever heard from her. No confirmed sightings, no credit card activity, no known calls, just a vague report from a gas station clerk near Wendover who remembered a girl with a camera, standing barefoot in the parking lot, staring up at a billboard advertising a local radio station's Battle of the Bands. She got into a silver van with Nevada plates and didn't look back. The next day, the radio station aired a segment about a fight that broke out during a set at a Roadhouse bar. One of the bands, Box Cutter Bell, left town that night. Claire was never seen again. Malcolm Hoyt had long accepted that his sister was dead. He was 12 when she vanished, the kind of age where memories fossilize in black and white, like Claire's favorite film. His entire adult life had been shaped in negative space. Holidays with an empty chair, his parents' marriage dissolving like old Polaroids in water, a face missing from every family photo. Now 40, Malcolm had built a quiet career as a photojournalist. He worked mostly in documentary features, urban decay, environmental collapse, the ghosts of small towns America left behind. He didn't shoot weddings. He didn't shoot people much at all. He shot echoes. So when he stepped into the Brookhaven Museum of American Culture's traveling exhibit on the Vanishing West, he expected rusted motel signs, empty service stations, old Pepsi machines. What he didn't expect, what stopped him cold, was a photograph taken by his sister. First, it was just a flicker, a familiarity in the grain. The image was dated 2001. A dusty roadside diner somewhere in Wyoming. A pack of teens leaning on a vintage Chevy Caprice, all leather jackets and lit cigarettes. The sun framed their heads like halos. The focus was soft, almost dreamlike. But the composition, the slightly canted framing, the heavy sky taking up 2/3 of the image, was Claire. It was her eye, her timing. He'd seen her use that exact trick 100 times on their weekend drives to nowhere. She used to say skies were the most honest part of a picture. He leaned closer. The caption read, "Untitled, photographer unknown, donated by private artist estate 2005. Catalogued under Claire L." His stomach turned. He whispered her name aloud. Claire. It was possible, of course, that it was coincidence. A mimic. A look-alike. But something deeper in him, older than logic, knew better. He stepped back, scanned the wall. There were a dozen more photos, each with the same caption. Claire L. No last name. No biography. No listed dates of birth or death. The next image hit harder. A pair of hands holding a cracked ceramic ashtray. The word Silverado etched in it. Behind them, blurred in depth of field, was a woman wearing a silver necklace. Claire's necklace. His gift to her. Christmas 1994. Sterling, with a charm shaped like a 35mm film canister. It had cost him 3 months of allowance. She wore it every day, called it her lucky token. Only now, in the photograph, it wasn't on Claire. It was on someone else. A girl with dark hair, sitting on the hood of a car. Her face was hidden by a cigarette puff and a shaft of light, but the necklace was unmistakable, worn loose, dangling below the collarbone. He stared, willing it not to be true. Claire never took it off. Ever. Unless she gave it away. His hands were clammy now, his breath shallow. He turned to the museum's front desk, his voice strained but steady. "Where did you get these photos?" The intern was young, maybe 23. She was covering for the front-of-house curator on a lunch break, and she didn't know much. But when Malcolm told her who he was, and who he believed Claire L. might be, her face lost all color. I think I remember something," she said, leading him to a side hallway. A few years ago, before the catalog system changed, there was a donation, anonymous. Just a box, no letter. We digitized the photos and assigned Claire L. because that's what was scribbled on the roll canisters. We didn't know if it was a name or a label. Malcolm's voice cracked. "Do you still have the box?" The intern paused. "We keep most of our analog archive in offsite storage, but I kept a scan of the intake form. For my thesis." She pulled out her phone, swiped through old images, then handed it to him. The form was faded but legible. On the origin line, donor unknown. On the working title, CL Lost Series. But what caught his eye was the handwriting. Looping, tilted right, capital L curling in on itself. He recognized it instantly. It was Claire's. The ride home was silent. The museum lights still buzzed in his ears. Claire was alive in 2001. That much was now undeniable. He pulled over at a rest stop and stared at the photos on his phone. The girl wearing Claire's necklace. The off-kilter compositions. The feel of someone drifting on the edges of society, always behind the camera, never in it. He opened a photo of her handwriting next to one of the old letters Claire used to send him when she stayed over at their grandma's in summer. Side by side, identical, the world tilted. His sister hadn't vanished in 1995. She'd simply stepped off the grid. But why? What had she seen or feared that made her stay gone for 6 years, then disappear again? And who was the girl in the necklace? The questions echoed like shutter clicks, one after another, and somewhere in his chest, the space where grief had hardened began to crack. Claire wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a witness, and someone somewhere knew why she never came home. Malcolm remembered the smell first. It was always the fixer, the sharp, sour reek of chemicals that clung to Claire's clothes long after she left the garage. That space, dimly lit with a single red bulb and black garbage bags taped to the windows, was Claire's temple. She called it the darkroom, like it was a room she lived in, not just a place where she processed film. She was 13 when she built it. A summer project funded by chore money and a box of her uncle's discarded camera gear. She'd spend hours in there, hunched over trays of developer, her hands stained with hypo and her voice humming old Mazzy Star songs under her breath. Malcolm was the only one she let inside. She'd show him photos, hold them up like precious relics. Rusted railroad spikes, moth wings, old men sitting on porches in the desert. She said abandoned things had the best stories. One night, she snapped a shot of him on their back porch, framed between two leaning lawn chairs, his hair soaked from rain. She laughed and called it Boy in Blue, even though the photo would end up in black and white. "Why do you take pictures of broken stuff?" he'd asked once. She just shrugged. "Because broken things tell the truth." Back then, he thought it was just something cool she'd heard in a movie. But now, sitting in a curator's office 29 years later, it sounded like a warning. The museum director, Angela Merritt, was older than Malcolm expected, late 60s, eyes like glass marbles behind thick frames. Her office was lined with artist bios, stacks of cardboard sleeves, and a corkboard covered in notes about upcoming exhibits. She'd been the director when the Claire L. photos were donated. "Yes, I remember the submission," she said. "It came in anonymously, dropped at our Denver branch and rerouted here. Box of negatives, contact sheets, a couple of burned CDs. Some darkroom prints, too. All unlabeled except for one post-it, Claire L. We assumed it was an alias." She pulled out a folder from a drawer and laid it flat. Inside were scans of the original photo intake form and a selection of prints not currently on display. Malcolm handled them with latex gloves, even though his hands were clean. Each one hit like a blow to the chest. A truck stop in Butte, Montana, abandoned but with fresh graffiti on the walls. A derelict school bus, parked like a carcass beside an empty road. A motel door swinging open, the number 8 dangling from one screw. Outdated stock, expired chemicals. The grain was coarse, the contrast high. Exactly the style Claire had fallen in love with when she was 15. She had a voice, Angela murmured. You can tell. Look at the angles. The way she frames space. She wasn't just documenting. She was seeing. Malcolm didn't respond. He was stuck on one photo near the bottom. A gas station window, cracked and sun-flared, reflecting a boy in a striped shirt. His shirt, the same one he wore in a family photo from the summer of '94. The framing was identical to a picture he had taken on their old disposable Kodak, a shot Claire had teased him about for weeks. She'd copied him, or maybe echoed him. She had this habit, he said softly, more to himself than to Angela. She used to rephotograph things, like taking other people's memories and developing them her way. Angela watched him closely. You're her brother. It wasn't a question. He nodded. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she reached into the drawer again and pulled out a plastic sleeve of contact sheets. These aren't public. Never made it into the exhibit. But I think you should see them. Malcolm flipped slowly through the sheets. They were darker than the others. More intimate. Photos of people rather than places, though their faces were always blurred or turned away. An older man sitting on a motel bed, half-dressed. A girl staring through a rearview mirror, her eyes red from crying. A series of hotel rooms, identical in layout but increasingly trashed. There was a pattern to them, like something was unraveling. What are these? He asked. Angela hesitated. We debated whether to include them. There's no context, no explanation. But we think they're from her final role. He looked up. Final. Most of the photos were dated between 1999 and 2001. But these are different. No timestamps. Different grain. We think they were processed later, maybe from older film. And they came bundled in a separate envelope. Handwritten, Bishop, California. That's where they were found. Malcolm's pulse kicked. He remembered that name from somewhere, an article, maybe. A fire in an old artist's squat. No survivors confirmed. Just ashes. Angela continued. Whoever she was, she saw something. Something she didn't or couldn't explain. He stared at the photos again. One caught his eye. A door cracked open. Beyond it, shadow. A hand, half-lit, reaching toward something unseen. It wasn't just art. It was evidence. And Claire, whatever name she went by, was leaving a trail. A darkroom breadcrumb. She had loved photography. But not just for its beauty. She loved it because it let her say what she couldn't out loud. And now, nearly 3 decades later, her brother was finally listening. The museum intern's name was Elise Morrigan. 26, grad student, fast talker with eyes that didn't miss much. She'd emailed Malcolm that same night, a brief message with the subject line, Claire L/archives, please call. They met the next morning in the museum's back office, a cramped administrative wing behind the exhibit halls. The walls were lined with flat files and steel shelves packed with acid-free boxes, each labeled in fine black Sharpie. The air smelled like paper dust and halogen bulbs. I wasn't supposed to save anything, Elise said, pushing her thick-rimmed glasses up her nose. But the submission struck me as strange. She motioned for Malcolm to follow. We catalog everything digitally now, but back then we had a different system. Donors filled out a physical intake form, left it with the materials. It was a security nightmare, no way to track chain of custody, no ID verification. This box showed up with only a first name and a location. Claire L., Nevada. She pulled open a drawer, rifled through a hanging file, and handed Malcolm a folded piece of yellowed paper sealed in a plastic sleeve. I took a photocopy of the form and scanned it for my thesis research. I shouldn't have, but something about it felt personal. Like it was someone trying to leave a message without saying anything directly. Malcolm stared at the intake sheet. The handwriting was unmistakable. The same loopy script Claire had used in every notebook, every holiday card, every label on her film rolls when they were kids. Her LS curled like ribbons. Her capital CS had a hard hook at the bottom, like she'd never quite shaken the habit of drawing hearts in the margins. He pulled a folded letter from his wallet, a fragment from one of her last postcards in 1995, and held them side by side. The match was perfect. "Jesus," he whispered. Not only had Claire been alive in 2001, she had submitted the photographs herself. It wasn't someone else's discovery. It wasn't a second-hand archive. It was her. Deliberate, methodical, hidden in plain sight. She had sent the photos out like a flare fired into darkness, just bright enough that someone, someday, might trace it back to her. Malcolm blinked hard and looked away, the pressure behind his eyes blurring the letters. "She was hiding," he said softly. "Not missing, not gone, just invisible." Elise nodded, her tone gentler now. She didn't leave a phone number or an address, but she included a roll of undeveloped film in a sealed canister. "We never processed it." Malcolm's head snapped up. "You what?" "I mean, we still have it," she stammered. "But it was unlabeled, and policy is not to tamper with unprocessed material unless explicitly authorized. We assumed it was blank or expired. It's been sitting in deep storage ever since." "Where?" "Off-site, technically, but we rotate materials every quarter. There's a chance it's here in the overflow drawer." Elise was already halfway across the room, unlocking a tall, narrow cabinet near the window. She flipped through a series of labeled sleeves, most marked with donor codes or red, expired stickers, until she stopped. She slid out a gray, foam-padded box and opened it. Inside sat a single black film canister, its surface scuffed, the old Kodak logo half faded from time. But on the lid, written in red marker, was a simple, unmistakable word. "Bishop." Malcolm's chest tightened. That was the town the museum director had mentioned. The place where the artist's squat burned down in 2005. "You said this was with the Claire L. donation?" Elise nodded. "Tucked into the bottom corner of the box, wrapped in a darkroom rag." He reached out, then hesitated. "Do you have the ability to process this here?" "Not anymore. We contract out now, but I know someone. She's old school. Still does chemical processing by hand. If we rush it, we could have prints by tomorrow." Malcolm exhaled, slow and measured. For nearly 30 years, his sister had been a question mark. A hole in every conversation. A photo missing from every frame. And now she was speaking through light and emulsion, frame by frame. Elise placed the canister in a padded sleeve and sealed it. "I'll take it today. She'll call me when she's done. No scans, no digital contamination. Just prints. Like Claire would have wanted." Malcolm nodded, voice dry. "Thank you." They stood in silence. On the table between them, Claire's handwriting stared up from the form like a ghost finally reaching out. Malcolm felt the weight of it settle into his bones. Not just the confirmation that she'd lived past 1995, but the realization that she'd chosen not to come back. She hadn't forgotten them. She hadn't wandered off or lost her memory. She'd vanished on purpose, which meant one thing and one thing only. She'd had a reason, and whatever was on that roll of film might finally reveal it. The prints arrived in a matte black envelope. No label, no invoice, just the faint chemical scent of darkroom work clinging to the edges. Elise met Malcolm at the museum's back entrance, her hands trembling just slightly as she handed them over. "She didn't scan anything," Elise said. "Just developed and dried. I haven't looked. Thought you should see them first." Malcolm nodded and carried the envelope to one of the museum's smaller viewing rooms, the kind normally reserved for school groups or private donors. He closed the door behind him, shut off the overhead fluorescence, and turned on the soft spotlight over the long black table. Then he opened the envelope. There were 12 prints, each one 5 by 7. The first few were familiar in style. Abandoned buildings, dust-choked hallways, wallpaper peeling like old skin. A motel judging by the layout. Room doors lined both sides of a narrow walkway, numbered in crooked brass. 10, 12, 14. One photo showed a key hanging from a knob, tagged Room 11. The next shot widened to reveal the motel's sign. Half-lit neon. The word sunset, barely visible beneath graffiti. The photo was taken at night with long exposure. The light smeared like ghosts across the frame. Malcolm felt a chill rise up his spine. Claire was telling a story. Not documenting. Not remembering. Unfolding. Midway through the sequence, the subjects changed. A drum kit battered and flecked with dried something, mud, maybe. A guitar case split along one side. A shirt hanging on a motel doorknob, soaked and wrung. Band gear. Claire had always followed music obsessively. Back in '95, it was small alt-rock bands that nobody outside the Mountain West had heard of. She used to hang flyers in coffee shops, tape stolen set lists to her walls. Malcolm reached the 9th photo and stopped breathing. A figure, partially obscured by motion blur, but unmistakably human, stood in the middle of a motel corridor. They were holding something. Person? A bundle of clothing? The shape was slumped, limp. One arm dangled loose. The flash caught the whites of the figure's eyes. It wasn't artistic. It wasn't framed. It was accidental. A shot taken quickly, desperately, like someone who didn't want to be seen but needed to document it anyway. The next photo was even worse. A boot print in wet concrete. A smear leading away from it. Something sticky, dark. The photo was taken low to the ground, like Claire had knelt to shoot it. She hadn't just found an abandoned motel. She had witnessed something, or been close enough to hear it. The final image was the only one taken in daylight. A wide shot of the desert, scrub brush and rusted wire fence. The motel in the far distance. A black van parked out front. She'd gotten away, and she'd never come back. Malcolm laid the photos out in sequence, staring at them like puzzle pieces. The pattern was clear. Claire had been there after something violent, or maybe during, and she'd captured it. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts, stopping on a number listed only as Detective Lennox. They'd spoken once, years ago, when Malcolm tried reopening Claire's case for the 4th time. The man had since retired, moved to Idaho, but Malcolm remembered his voice. Measured, blunt, and unflinchingly thorough. He dialed. The line rang twice before picking up. Lennox. Detective, it's Malcolm Hoyt. Claire's brother. Pause. Haven't heard that name in a while. I found something. Photos. Undeveloped until now. I need you to look at them. They met 2 days later at a roadside diner in northern Utah, halfway between their cities. Lennox looked older, softer in the face, with silver creeping through his hair. But his eyes were just as sharp. Malcolm laid out the prints, one by one, like a crime scene. Lennox didn't speak for a long time, just studied each image with quiet intensity. This one, he said finally, pointing to the hallway shot. Sunset Motel. That was off Route 19, just past the Nevada line. Demolished around '03. He tapped the figure holding the slumped shape. That's Room 11. There was a homicide there. August '95. Malcolm's throat dried. Man named Joel Duran. Local promoter. Traveled with bands, sometimes doubled as road manager. Found dead in the bathtub. Blunt force trauma. No witnesses. No arrest. Malcolm could barely get the words out. Claire, was she there? Lennox nodded slowly. That was the rumor. Gas station clerk remembered a girl with a camera hanging around the night before. Said she looked nervous. Was asking if Boxcutter Bell was playing that weekend. Clerk thought she was just a groupie. Didn't realize she was missing until the posters went up a week later. Malcolm stared at the motel photo again. The van. The silence. She saw something, he said. She saw too much, Lennox corrected. And then quietly, almost to himself, that's why she ran. The realization hit like a tidal wave. Claire hadn't disappeared out of teenage rebellion or drugs or mental health. She'd witnessed a murder, maybe even photographed the moment before it happened. And she'd been smart enough to know that telling someone could get her killed. So she'd vanished, changed names, donated her work under an alias. She left behind no letters, no phone calls, no breadcrumbs. Just a roll of film sealed in a rag. She wanted the story told, but not until it was safe. Malcolm gathered the photos, heart pounding. Now the question wasn't just why she disappeared. It was who else knew what she knew, and whether they were still out there. Detective Lennox stirred his coffee slowly, eyes locked on the print of the motel hallway as if it might still speak. There was another girl, he said finally. Same week Claire vanished. 5 days later, just across the Nevada line. Her name was Rachel Ellison, 17, from Fallon. Went missing outside a roadside bar where Boxcutter Bell played their last known set. Malcolm's chest tightened. Was it ever connected? Not officially. Different jurisdictions. Rachel's case ended up buried in tribal police politics and vanished between counties. Her car was found abandoned with a dead battery and half a tank of gas. Nobody pushed to link it, but her cousin reported she'd left that night to follow the band. Malcolm reached into his messenger bag and pulled out Claire's last known journal. One of the few things their parents had kept, pages worn soft at the edges. Inside were lyrics, hand-drawn track lists, and occasional confessions written sideways in the margins. He flipped to the back. On the final page, there it was, a penciled list of band names. Boxcutter Bell circled twice. And next to it, a single name underlined in bold. Jace. Malcolm tapped the name. She knew him. Lennox leaned forward. That was their bassist, Jace Roldan. Minor record, bar fights, possession charges. Never charged in Duran's death. But witnesses claimed he left the motel the next morning, acting like nothing happened. And Claire circled his name, Malcolm said. Means she noticed him, Lennox replied. Or more. They sat in silence a moment. Then Lennox said, You ever hear how Jace died? Malcolm shook his head. Alley in Missoula, 1999. Shot twice in the back of the head. No witnesses. No suspects. No wallet. Malcolm felt the floor shift beneath his feet. And you think? Lennox's voice stayed level. I think if Claire witnessed a murder and she knew Jace was involved, and then he turned up dead 4 years later, you've got two options. Coincidence. He paused. Or cleanup. Malcolm rubbed his hands down his face. Are you saying my sister might have? I'm saying she vanished for a reason. She survived. That kind of fear changes people. Maybe she started running. Maybe she started watching. Either way, we have a dead promoter, a missing girl, and a bassist with a bullet in his brain. Malcolm didn't respond. He was staring again at the photo of the motel hallway. But not at the figure. At the wall. There, just behind the blurred silhouette, was something he hadn't seen before. A symbol. Spray-painted or scrawled in Sharpie. A jagged starburst with a spiral in the center. He flipped to Rachel Ellison's case file that Lennox had printed. It was slim. 2 pages. But the final paragraph mentioned the last confirmed sighting of Rachel standing beside a black van outside the Star House. A pop-up venue set up in an abandoned car lot. Star House? Malcolm repeated. That symbol, it's on the wall in Claire's photo. Same name. He looked back at Lennox. These aren't just locations. They're stations. The band was traveling in a loop. Small venues, roadside motels, gas stations. Claire was mapping them. Lennox exhaled slowly. Then she wasn't just running. She was tracking. Malcolm sat back, his mind spinning. Rachel Ellison, Claire Hoyt, Joel Duran, Jace Roldan. Each one linked to the same tour, the same week, the same stretch of forgotten roads. And all of it buried until now. Do we know if Rachel was ever found? Malcolm asked. No, Lennox said. Never surfaced. Never confirmed dead either. Malcolm stared at the last photo from the film roll, the black van outside the Sunset Motel. Could Claire have seen what happened to her too? It's possible. He paused. But if she did, then someone else might know Claire saw. Malcolm's mouth went dry. Meaning if she was a loose thread, someone could have pulled it. He looked down at the table of prints again. At the shadows, the smears, the The silence. The story wasn't linear. It was scattered like ash. And Claire, in the middle of it all, wasn't just a victim. She was a witness, a documentarian, and maybe, just maybe, something more. He stood, carefully collecting the photos. The weight of them felt heavier now. Not just memories, not just evidence, but warnings. There was still more film out there. He was sure of it. Claire had always shot in threes, triptychs she called them. The Bishop role was only part of the story. If he wanted the truth, he'd have to follow her trail, just like she once followed the music. The lead came from a forum no longer indexed by search engines. One of those scattershot message boards archived only by obsessives, post-urbanism archive/visual frontierism/dead eyes open. It had fewer than 100 users, and almost all of them had been dormant since 2011. But buried in a thread titled Ghost Town Residency Projects, 1990 to 2005, Malcolm found a mention of her, Claire L. Shot with 3200 delta all-night exposures. Didn't speak much. Stayed at the estuary with the collective in 2000. Sharp eye. Obsessed with symmetry. Probably the best of us. The post was signed ER. He cross-checked the location. Estuary was a nickname for an abandoned mining town in western Arizona, officially called Warren Creek. It had been converted in the late 90s into a semi-legal art residency by a group called The Collective, a nomadic, loosely formed community of fringe artists, photographers, and installation junkies who squatted in dead spaces and documented decay like it was sacred. They operated under no real name, no permit, no ownership. Just movement, cameras, tape recorders, hand-pressed zines that sold for $5 in underground bookstores. Claire would have fit in like a ghost among ghosts. Malcolm tracked the handle ER through archived photo blogs and finally landed on a small gallery website, barely functional, that hadn't been updated since 2015. The contact email still worked. He sent a message. The response came within 2 hours. A single line. I'll talk, but not over email. They met at a diner off I-17 near Sedona. The woman who introduced herself as Eden Roque looked exactly how Malcolm imagined a collective survivor might. Fraying denim, copper rings stacked on both hands, gray streaks in her black braid like cracks in polished stone. Claire, she said. Once coffee had been poured and the waitress was out of earshot. Yeah, we knew her. Everyone thought she was a mystic or something. What do you mean? She didn't talk much. Never told us where she was from. Didn't drive. Never used phones. She'd vanish for days. Then show up with a stack of prints so good it made you feel like you should quit. Malcolm listened, barely breathing. She used the name Claire L. That's all she ever said. Her voice was soft, like she was always whispering in case someone else might be listening. But man, her work... Eden trailed off. She saw things we didn't. Malcolm slid one of the Bishop prints across the table, the motel hallway, the blurred figure. Eden froze. Her mouth tightened. You've got that roll. What do you know about it? Eden tapped the photo with one ringed finger. She gave it to a guy named Tino. Said if anything ever happened to her, he should bury it. Not burn. Not destroy. Just hide. I guess he didn't. Probably freaked. She witnessed a murder, Malcolm said. I figured, Eden replied. There was something in her eyes. Like she was looking out from the far side of something nobody else could see. Malcolm leaned in. Did she talk to anyone? Confide in anyone? No one close. She trusted film more than people. She'd write messages on the backs of photos. Never letters. Never journals. Said words got you caught. Malcolm showed her the intake form from the museum. Is this her writing? Eden studied it. Nodded. Yup. That's Claire's curl. He swallowed hard. Do you know how she died? Eden's face went still. The fire, she said. Bishop, California. That was our last squat. We were squatting the Gloriana Hotel. 5 stories of peeling velvet and broken staircases. She was there. I saw her that morning. But when the fire started, she didn't come out. She stayed inside? She'd been talking about finally finishing something. Something big. Said she was going to seal her prints. Pack them. Mail them out. I think she knew it was coming. Or wanted it to. Malcolm's throat clenched. She gave up. Eden shook her head slowly. I don't think it was about giving up. I think it was about leaving something behind that nobody could erase. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small archival envelope. Inside were 6 contact sheets and a folded plastic sleeve. I kept these, she said. I've had them for 20 years. Figured she'd want them seen someday. Malcolm opened the envelope. Each contact sheet showed a different town, a different season, but the same haunted eye. One image caught his breath. A girl, maybe Rachel Ellison, standing at a fence line with a cigarette in her hand, the black van parked just behind her. Claire had labeled the negative, RE, last stop. Another showed Jace Roldan, alone at a gas pump. The camera caught him mid-turn, his eyes catching the lens in surprise. The timestamp was from 1997, 2 years after the murder. Malcolm looked up. She was tracking them. Eden nodded. Like I said, she saw what we didn't. He sat back, stunned. The picture was coming into focus, dark, sharp, and irreversible. Claire hadn't just run from trauma. She'd embedded herself in its wake. She had lived in the margins, built a life from fragments, used her camera not to forget, but to remember with surgical precision. And she'd left breadcrumbs. Not random, not nostalgic. Documentary, intentional, final. Eden sipped her coffee. You gonna tell her story? Malcolm looked at the photos again, Claire's handwriting looping in the corners. No, he said quietly. I'm going to let her tell it. The Gloriana Hotel was still there. Or at least its skeleton was. The fire in August of 2005 gutted everything above the second floor, and what remained now was a blackened husk wrapped in rusted caution tape and silence. It sat behind a chain-link fence just west of Bishop's downtown. Too damaged to restore, too historic to demolish. Malcolm stood just outside the perimeter, staring up at the charred windows like they might still remember her. The structure had once been ornate. A Victorian brick hotel from the early 1900s, the kind of place that had hosted railroad men, silver barons, and traveling magicians. By the time the collective squatted there, it was already collapsing under its own stories. The fire report, pulled from the Bishop Fire Department's archives, told a blunt tale. Electrical overload, second floor. Time of call, 3:08 a.m. Cause, undetermined. One confirmed fatality, unidentifiable remains. No known residents. That was it. No name, no follow-up. Just a body left behind and a dozen ghosts who never looked back. But now, 20 years later, Eden Roque had given Malcolm a name. She stayed behind, she'd said. She wanted to finish the role. She said if she died before it was done, it wasn't hers. Malcolm looked at the faded fire line fluttering in the wind. Claire had been right there. Not missing. Not lost. Just unclaimed. The local sheriff hadn't known much. Just that the collective had been loosely tracked by law enforcement. Usually trespassing, vagrancy, nothing serious. They were ghosts moving through ghost towns. No one kept records. No one had wanted to. But one firefighter had. Retired now, living in Big Pine, a few miles south. Malcolm tracked him down in a sun-faded trailer beneath the jagged ridgelines of the Sierras. Name was Cal Monroe, mid-70s, thin as a broomstick, but sharp-eyed. He welcomed Malcolm with suspicion and tea. The girl, Cal said, after Malcolm showed him Claire's Bishop photos. Yeah, I remember her. You were on the scene? First engine. We got there 6 minutes after the call. Place was already lit up. Most of the others had scattered. Hippie types. Ran as soon as we pulled up. But one of them, she was on the 3rd floor. Never came out. Malcolm swallowed. Did you see her? Not clearly. Smoke was thick. But someone shouted from inside. One of our guys said he saw a flashlight in the window, then nothing. By the time we breached the stairs, the whole floor was caving in. He shook his head. She didn't run. That stuck with me. Everyone else bolted. But she stayed. Malcolm placed a print on the table. Claire's last known self-portrait. Barely more than a reflection in a broken mirror. Cal stared at it. Long quiet. That's her, he said at last. No question. Malcolm's chest tightened, even though he'd already known. I could have found her, he said quietly. She was still here. No one knew who to call, Kel replied gently. She didn't leave a name, didn't carry ID, just a backpack and, he paused. What? There was a box. One of the guys grabbed it thinking it might have accelerants. But it was heavy, metal, sealed tight. We tagged it for evidence and sent it to storage. Malcolm sat upright. You still have it? Maybe. I can check. Cal disappeared into the back of the trailer. It took 20 minutes, and Malcolm nearly wore a hole in the floor pacing. When the old firefighter returned, he was holding a small gray lead-lined box, dented at the corners but still intact. We keep sealed containers longer in fire cases, just in case there's hazardous material, he said. Nobody ever claimed this one. Malcolm opened it slowly. Inside, one film canister. Old, black, faint red markings on the lid, nearly worn off but still visible. Claire, last. He stared at it for a long time. The box had saved it, protected it from heat, smoke, water. Claire had known what she was doing. She hadn't just wanted to finish the role. She'd wanted it to survive. She'd built her own time capsule, a vault made of metal and memory. Malcolm walked the ruins of the Gloriana the next morning. Permission granted, hazard tape moved aside. He wandered the cracked tile and soot-dusted banisters like a man searching for an echo. The third floor was gone. Beams collapsed inward, charred remnants opened to the sky. But he could still feel her presence. In the shadows, the silence, the way the light fell through a broken window in perfect lines across the debris. He crouched near the fire-blackened railing and whispered, I'm here. There was no reply, of course. Just the creak of wind and metal. But it felt like a reply anyway. That night, back at his motel, he held the canister in his palm. He should have found her sooner. He knew that now. But she hadn't wanted to be found. Not until she was ready. Not until the story was finished. He texted Elise. Got something. Last roll. Safe. We'll bring it to the lab tomorrow. She responded instantly. Darkrooms prepped. We'll do it by hand. Just like she would have. He placed the canister back in the lead box and closed the lid. Somewhere inside was the last thing Claire had to say. Not with words. With light. The lab smelled like vinegar and dust. Elise met Malcolm at the rear entrance just after dawn, unlocking the side door with practiced hands. She looked like she hadn't slept, and neither had he. I cleared the schedule, she said. No interns today. Just us. The darkroom was quiet, red-lit, and ready. A sink basin gurgled softly in the corner. Trays lined up like waiting coffins. Malcolm placed the lead box on the steel table with a reverence usually reserved for funeral urns. He held the canister one last time, then handed it to Elise. You want to do the honors? No, he said. You should. It's her story. She nodded and cracked the seal. The film slid out stiffly, decades-old emulsion crackling just slightly in the dry air. Elise fed it into the reel, fingers practiced, gentle, like she was untangling memory itself. They began the process in silence. Developer, agitation, stop bath, fixer, rinse. When the film strip unfurled at last, slick and glistening, Malcolm leaned in. 12 frames. He stared at the negatives, inverted ghosts hanging in the red light. The first few shots were familiar in tone. A room lit by a single bulb, cigarette smoke curling in the air. A Polaroid pinned to a wall with a bent tack. A close-up of a guitar string mid-vibration. Bottle caps stacked in a tower beside a cracked ashtray. It was a backstage room. Claire had been there. The next shot showed two men slumped on a couch. One asleep, the other grinning, holding a drink. The timestamp in the bottom right read, August 14th, 1995, 11:17 p.m. Malcolm froze. Joel Duran had been killed at 11:43 p.m. He was staring at the last 26 minutes of Claire's life as Claire Hoyt. Frame 6 was tighter. The man on the right, Jace, standing with his back to the camera, head turned mid-sentence. as if Claire had called his name. His expression was caught just between amusement and suspicion. The next image was blurry. Quick motion. Panic, maybe. Something off-frame. Then came the photo that sucked the breath from Malcolm's chest. A girl, young, face twisted in fear, caught mid-sob in harsh flash. Her shoulder was streaked red. Behind her, a wall splattered with something darker than paint. Her hand was raised, pushing toward the camera, like trying to stop time itself. Frame 9. A man holding a hammer. Shadowed. Only the tool catching the light, the curve of a face barely distinguishable, enough to make out cheekbones, a tattoo at the base of his neck. The next image was a floor, cracked tile, a smear across it, a shoe left behind. Frame 11 was the door, slightly ajar, light from a hallway bleeding in. And the final frame, a self-portrait, Claire's reflection in a broken mirror, half her face lost in shadow. She was crying, one eye wide, the camera partially in frame, as if caught in a moment of indecision. Her finger was still on the shutter. She'd taken it before running. Malcolm stared at the print as it emerged in the tray, detail by detail blooming like bruises under the developer. It wasn't fear. It was decision. She had chosen the camera over the scream. And then she'd disappeared. Later, in Elisa's office, under clean light and clean air, Malcolm stared at the high-res scans. Frame 9, the hammer, now crystal clear. The tattoo was identifiable. A stylized R inside a lightning bolt. He knew the symbol. Rachel Ellison's cousin had mentioned it once. Said one of the roadies wore it. A man who vanished right after Duran's murder and reappeared years later in a different city, under a different name. Malcolm had seen it in one of Claire's earlier photos, scrawled on a set list pinned to the motel wall. It wasn't random. Claire had tracked it, all of it, and she'd never gone to the police, because she didn't trust them. Malcolm dug through the files Lennox had sent. Duran had been loosely tied to an underground circuit of indie acts and unregistered venues, some of which had been investigated for trafficking illegal weapons. Worse, rumors swirled for years that Duran had paid off local police to keep certain shows unbothered. Claire would have heard those rumors. She would have known calling the cops didn't guarantee safety. So she documented. She vanished. She waited. And now, 2 decades too late, the truth had emerged, one frame at a time. Malcolm leaned back in the chair, exhaustion crashing in all at once. She could have gone to the authorities. She could have come home. But instead, she'd trusted the camera. Trusted that someday someone would see. The photos were evidence now. Elise called in contacts from the Cold Case Coalition. Within 48 hours, an analyst identified the man with the tattoo. He died in 2007 of a drug overdose, just 2 years after the Gloriana fire. Too late for justice, but not too late for truth. And truth, Malcolm realized, was all Claire had ever wanted. He held the last frame again, her self-portrait, and ran his fingers gently along the edge. This was her goodbye, and her confession, and her warning, all in one. Detective Lennox didn't say much when Malcolm handed him the envelope. He just laid the prints out across his kitchen table one by one. Like puzzle pieces, his mouth a hard, unreadable line. The light through the window shifted as they worked. Morning turning to afternoon. Sun falling across images that had waited decades to be seen. They paused on frame 9. The hammer, the tattoo, the blur of movement that couldn't disguise what it was. Violence captured mid-breath. "That's him," Lennox said at last. "Marcus Ray Ladd, known as Razor, tied to at least 3 unsolved assaults between 94 and 97, all in connection with Duran's venues. We suspected he was involved in Duran's death, but he vanished right after. Used a dozen aliases across 3 states. Died in a halfway house outside Reno in 2007. Heroin. No ID. Took us days to figure out who he was." Malcolm felt a bitter knot form in his throat. "He got away with it." Lennox gave a slow, grim nod. "Yeah, but now there's evidence. Not just photos, witness documentation. Dated, composed, confirmable." He looked at Malcolm, and his voice softened. "This breaks it open. Even posthumously, it clears your sister. confirms she wasn't just a missing person. She was the only one who saw it and had the guts to record it. Malcolm looked down at the photographs again. Forensics teams would comb through every frame now, match timelines, pull metadata. But none of it would explain what mattered most. That Claire had done it all alone. That she had carried the weight of violence and silence for a decade, trusting only her lens to bear witness. "I should have tried harder," Malcolm whispered. "I should have looked sooner. She was right there, leaving clues." Lennox didn't reply at first. Then he said, "Sometimes the loudest voices aren't shouting. They're just waiting for someone to listen." Later that night, Malcolm sat in the motel room, staring at the spread of prints on the bed. One photo in particular held him hostage. The one with the terrified girl, Rachel Ellison, likely, caught mid-flash, face frozen in fear. He thought about the weight Claire must have carried after that night. Witnessing violence was one thing. Living with the certainty that the people behind it were still out there, protected by silence and scattered jurisdiction lines, was another. Claire hadn't just been hiding. She'd been surviving, outsmarting the system by living outside it. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was design. Malcolm picked up the self-portrait again, her final frame. Half of her face hidden in cracked glass. The reflection fractured, imperfect, but still there. Negative space. That was the phrase Claire always used when teaching him about composition. "It's not just what you see," she used to say. "It's what you don't. The shadows. The absence. That's where the story hides." He finally understood. She didn't leave a suicide note. She didn't call home. She didn't scream. She built her silence into structure. Each photo, each framing, each missing caption. She composed her truth as a negative image, trusting that one day, someone would flip it. And now he had. The museum's special exhibit opened 2 weeks later. It was small, unpublicized, just a quiet, invitation-only installation tucked into a side gallery of the Brookhaven Museum. A new plaque had been mounted beside the entrance. Claire Hoyt, 1978 to 2005, photographer, witness, archivist of truth. This exhibition contains evidence recovered from the 1995 murder of Joel Duran and the disappearance of Rachel Ellison. These prints were shot and preserved by Claire Hoyt, who documented what she could not report. Her work stands as testimony not only to what happened, but to who she was. Inside, 12 images were displayed on black velvet. No artist statements, no interpretation, just the frames. Elise had arranged them chronologically, starting with the motel hallway, ending with the mirror. The last photo sat alone. Malcolm stood in front of it for a long time. He didn't cry. Not because the grief was gone, it never would be, but because there was a strange kind of peace in finally seeing the silence named. He spoke softly, not for anyone else to hear. "You told the truth. Even when it broke you, you told it." That night, Malcolm drove to the overlook just west of Bishop, where the mountains looked sharp enough to cut open the sky. He brought Claire's camera, salvaged from the fire, still singed at the edge but intact. He loaded it with new film, raised it toward the horizon, and clicked. The gallery was almost ready. Malcolm stood under the 2 white ceiling lights, arms crossed, scanning the walls lined with Claire's photographs, now matted, framed, and arranged with an archivist's care. There were no numbered tags, no QR codes, just titles in a delicate serif font on brass plaques below each frame. Ruin number 6, Nevada. Shadows behind glass. The Red Motel. Self-portrait, broken mirror. The museum had given him full curatorial control, not out of charity but reverence. Claire's final roll of film, her darkroom archives, even her travel journals had become the centerpiece of a temporary exhibit that no one could believe hadn't existed before. They titled it, The Photographer's Sister, the recovered work of Claire Hoyt. Malcolm had argued against the title, but the board insisted. "You're the one who brought her back," they said. "You gave her voice context. You are part of the story." Maybe, but this was never his exhibit. Not really. Claire had curated it long before he arrived. She just hadn't lived long enough to see it hung. In a corner glass case, Nestled beneath a soft beam of overhead light, sat the only thing not touched by time or development. Claire's scorched Nikon, the final camera. The outer shell was warped where the heat from the Bishop fire had blistered its casing, but the lens remained intact. The strap, her hand-stitched one, with the embroidered initials SH, had survived. And inside, still seated in the chamber, was an empty roll. Used up. Finished. He'd debated whether to remove the film to develop even more. But no, that roll had already spoken. Let it rest. The exhibit opened quietly. A single press release. No fanfare. Just a new wing, tucked into the museum's contemporary photography section. Word spread anyway, not because of spectacle but substance. The story had a gravity to it. People came because they were pulled. Former collective members trickled in from across the western states. Rachel Ellison's sister flew out from Massachusetts. Lennox showed up in a tie that didn't fit him, standing near the back like a sentry, nodding slowly at each frame. Elise was there, too. She stood beside Malcolm near the witness sequence. 5 photos displayed in order, undated except for the final timestamp. August 3rd, 1995, 2:07 a.m. A hammer. A scream behind glass. Claire's eye watching. Recording. This was the one, Elise said quietly. That cracked the narrative. It nearly cracked her, too, Malcolm murmured. They stood in silence, surrounded by the soft hush of other visitors. Footsteps on hardwood, breath-catching, whispers dying in the corners. At the exit, just past the final piece, was a plaque mounted in bronze. Claire Hoyt, 1978 to 2005. Photographer, archivist, sister. She documented what others looked away from. Her lens did not save her, but it preserved the truth. This exhibit was curated by Malcolm Hoyt. In memory, in testimony, in love. Beneath the plaque was a single framed image. The last in the sequence. The only one Claire hadn't taken. It was a photo of a boy, maybe 10 years old, standing in the middle of an empty road, arms outstretched like he was about to fly. The edges were uneven, hand-trimmed. The lighting was natural, no flash. Behind him, the hills of Utah stretched into the haze of summer. Malcolm. Claire had taken it sometime in 1993. He had found the print sealed inside one of her darkroom envelopes, labeled in her handwriting. M. Always facing forward. When the exhibit closed that night, Malcolm remained behind. The museum was silent, empty hallways echoing in soft artificial light. A cleaning staff member wheeled a cart down the far corridor. Malcolm walked the gallery alone, letting the silence settle around him. Each photo, now intimately familiar, still managed to hum with something he couldn't name. When he reached the self-portrait, the one in the mirror, he stopped. This time he noticed something new. In the lower left corner of the cracked mirror, there was a faint reflection. Not Claire, not the room, but a figure behind the camera. Him. He didn't remember being there. Didn't remember standing that close when she shot it. But there he was. Out of focus, yes, but unmistakable. He laughed quietly, a choked sound through his nose. You sneaky bastard. She had seen him. Even then, she had found a way to place him in the frame. The next morning, Malcolm returned to Salt Lake City. His apartment was still sparse, still undecorated. But on his desk sat Claire's camera. Beside it, her burned-out journal, a roll of her favorite black and white stock, and a small leather-bound notebook labeled simply, Sage Contact Sheets. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he loaded new film into his own camera, stepped out onto the fire escape, and pointed it toward the morning light. His fingers paused over the shutter. Then, click.